The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the silence. It was the way my father's glass slipped from his hand, not shattered, not dropped, just forgotten midair, as if gravity itself had stopped mattering. Conversations froze, forks hovered above plates, and in the center of it all, my grandmother's voice still echoed in the room like a church bell no one wanted to hear. "So," she had said gently, smiling at me with pride, "I'm glad you finally told them you've been paying the property taxes all these years. It must have been such a heavy secret to carry alone." No one moved. My mother's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. My father didn't look at me. He stared at the floor like it had suddenly opened into a bottomless pit. And that was the exact moment I realized the truth I thought would bring my family together was about to destroy it. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had grown up believing family meant safety. So many of you wrote about hidden secrets, quiet sacrifices, and moments when the people you trusted most turned out to be strangers. I didn't know it then, but my story would become one of those comments. Because everything started long before that retirement party, long before my grandmother spoke those words, long before I understood why my parents always avoided one simple topic: the house. I grew up believing the house was sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way everyone treated it like something fragile, like a memory you weren't allowed to touch too hard. It was a 2-story brick home with peeling white shutters, the kind of place that smelled permanently like old wood, cinnamon, and thyme. My grandmother used to say it held the soul of our family. She would run her fingers along the banister and whisper, "Every scratch tells a story." As a child, I loved that idea. I imagined invisible ghosts of birthdays, arguments, laughter, and whispered apologies floating inside the walls. But there was one rule. No one talked about money connected to the house. Ever. If I asked about repairs, my parents would say, "Don't worry about adult things." If I asked who owned it, they'd say, "It belongs to the family." If I asked why my grandmother sometimes looked anxious when letters arrived in the mail, they'd change the subject. The first crack in the illusion appeared when I was 17. I came home from school early one day and found my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, her hands trembling over a stack of unopened envelopes. She looked smaller than usual, fragile, scared. When she saw me, she tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Just paperwork," she said, but I noticed the bold red words stamped across one envelope. Final notice. Even at 17, I knew what that meant. "Grandma," I asked carefully, "what's wrong?" She hesitated, then whispered something that would quietly reshape my life. "They're going to take the house if the taxes aren't paid." I remember the exact feeling in my chest, like cold water had suddenly filled my lungs. "What do you mean, take it?" I asked. She looked toward the living room as if afraid someone might overhear. "Your parents, they've had a hard time. They said they would handle it, but years passed and the bills kept coming. I didn't want to worry you." Years, not months. Years. In that moment, something shifted inside me, something that felt like stepping from childhood into a place where innocence didn't exist. "How much?" I asked. She hesitated again, then told me a number that felt impossible for someone my age. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing strangers walking into our home, changing the locks, throwing our family's history into trash bags. I thought about my grandmother, how she'd spent decades building memories inside those walls. And I thought about my parents. Why hadn't they told me? Why hadn't they let it get this bad? At 17, I didn't understand adult struggles. I didn't understand debt or pride or fear. I only understood one thing. I couldn't let the house disappear. So I did something that changed everything. I got a job, then another, then another. While my friends went to parties, I worked late shifts. While they posted vacation photos, I balanced spreadsheets and skipped meals to save money. Slowly, painfully, year by year, I paid the property taxes, quietly, without telling my parents, because my grandmother made me a promise. "Don't tell them," she said once, tears in her eyes. "They already feel ashamed. Let them keep their dignity." So I kept the secret for 10 years. 10 years of sacrifice. 10 years of believing I was protecting my family. 10 years of thinking one day they would be grateful when they finally found out. Which brings us back to my father's retirement party, the night everything exploded. It was supposed to be a celebration. Music playing, relatives laughing, my parents glowing with pride after decades of hard work, and my grandmother happy, emotional, and unaware she was about to reveal the one secret that had defined my entire adult life. When she mentioned the property tax payments, I expected surprise, maybe tears, maybe gratitude. What I got instead was silence. And then something far worse. My father slowly looked up at me, his eyes filled not with shock, but with something I had never seen before. Fear and guilt, deep, crushing guilt. Then he whispered 3 words that made my stomach drop. "You weren't supposed to know." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about unpaid taxes. It was about a lie so big, it was about to tear my entire family apart. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. "You weren't supposed to know." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The room was still frozen around us, relatives pretending to sip drinks, cousins staring at their phones, my mother gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had turned white. I forced a shaky laugh, trying to break the tension. "Dad, what do you mean?" I asked. "Grandma just told everyone I've been paying the property taxes, that's all." But he didn't laugh back. He didn't even blink. His eyes stayed locked on mine, and I saw something terrifying in them, something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't anger, it wasn't embarrassment, it was panic. The kind of panic you see in someone whose secret has just been dragged into the light. My mother suddenly stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly across the floor. "That's enough," she said sharply, forcing a smile toward the guests. "Let's not talk about financial matters today. It's a celebration." Her voice sounded too cheerful, too controlled, too rehearsed. But my grandmother, bless her innocent heart, looked confused. "Financial matters?" she said gently. "I was just praising your child. They saved this house for all of us. You should be proud." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument, because pride was not what I saw in my parents' faces. I felt heat rising in my chest. For 10 years I had carried this secret alone. 10 years of sacrifice, stress, sleepless nights, believing I was doing something noble, believing I was protecting my parents. So why did they look like I had just betrayed them? "Mom," I said quietly, "why are you acting like this is a bad thing?" She wouldn't look at me. Instead, she turned toward my father, And in that tiny moment of silent communication between them, I realized something chilling. They both already knew. Not about me paying the taxes, but about something else, something connected to the house, something they had been hiding together for years. The party ended early after that. Guests made awkward excuses and left quickly, whispering to each other near the door. My grandmother went upstairs, confused and worried, repeatedly asking what she had said wrong. And I stayed in the living room, sitting across from my parents as the decorations drooped around us like tired witnesses. No music, no laughter, just tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, I spoke. I deserve an explanation. My father rubbed his face slowly, like a man who had aged 10 years in one night. "You were never supposed to find out this way," he said quietly. "Find out what?" I demanded. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about money. This was about something deeper, something ugly. My mother suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. "The house," she whispered, "was never meant to be yours." The words hit me like a slap. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I never thought it was mine. It belongs to Grandma." She shook her head. "No," she said, "not anymore." A cold sensation spread through my body. "What are you talking about?" My father took a long breath, then finally said the words that changed everything. "We sold the house years ago." Time stopped. I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "Sold?" I repeated slowly. "That's impossible. We're still living here." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Yes," he said, "but legally it hasn't been ours for a long time." My mind struggled to process what he was saying. "How does that even make sense?" I whispered. My mother's voice cracked as she answered. "We were drowning and dead after the business failed. Loans, medical bills, everything piled up at once. We didn't know what else to do." My heart pounded. "So you sold the house?" "To a private investor," my father said quietly. "Someone who agreed to let us keep living here as long as we paid rent and maintained the property." The room felt like it was spinning. "And Grandma?" I asked. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never knew," she whispered. "We told her the paperwork was just refinancing." A wave of nausea hit me. "You lied to her?" My father looked broken. "We thought we could fix everything before she ever found out." Before I ever found out. The realization hit me like lightning. "Wait," I said slowly, my voice trembling. "If you sold the house, then why were property taxes still coming?" Neither of them answered immediately. And that silence, that terrible silence, was worse than anything they could have said. My chest tightened as a horrifying possibility formed in my mind. "No, no, don't tell me." My father finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Because the buyer stopped paying them." The world tilted. "What?" "He disappeared after a few years, stopped responding to calls, stopped handling any obligations tied to the property. Legally, everything became complicated." Complicated. That word felt like an insult to the decade of struggle I had endured. "So while I was working myself to exhaustion, while I was paying those taxes thinking I was saving our home," my voice cracked, "you were letting me?" My mother sobbed. "We didn't know it was you. We thought the investor had resumed payments. We thought the problem was resolved." But my father said nothing, and his silence told me the truth. He suspected, maybe even known, but he never asked, never checked, because asking might have forced him to face the truth. The anger inside me finally erupted. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed? 10 years of my life. I delayed my dreams. I worked nonstop. I thought I was protecting our family. Tears streamed down my face. I thought I was doing something good. My father's voice broke as he whispered, "You were." But that only made it worse, because if he knew, then why hadn't he stopped me? Why hadn't he told me the truth? I stood up, shaking. "So who owns this house now?" I demanded. Neither of them answered immediately. My father's hands trembled, and when he finally spoke, his words sent a cold chill down my spine. "We don't know," he said, and a heavy silence fell. Then he added quietly, "And 3 months ago, we received a letter." My heart pounded. "What letter?" He swallowed hard. "A notice," he said, "from someone claiming to be the new legal owner." The air felt suddenly suffocating. "And what did they want?" My father looked at me with hollow eyes. "They want us out." My breath caught in my throat. The house, after everything, after 10 years of sacrifice, after believing I had saved it, we were about to lose it anyway. And then my father said something that made the blood run cold in my veins. "And they also know someone has been paying the taxes all these years." A terrifying realization struck me. "They know about me?" He nodded slowly. "And they want to meet you." "They want to meet you." The words echoed in my mind like a distant alarm that wouldn't stop ringing. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Why me?" I whispered. My father's eyes looked hollow, as if he already knew the answer, but couldn't bring himself to say it. "Because," he said quietly, "whoever owns the house now believes you are the only one who truly cared about it." A chill ran down my spine. Not cared about it, controlled it. That was what he meant. That was what they meant. My stomach twisted. "Who are they?" I asked. My mother shook her head helplessly. "We don't know much," she said. "Just a name on legal documents and an address for a meeting." The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls themselves were closing in. "What name?" I asked slowly. My father hesitated. Then he said a name that meant absolutely nothing to me. Yet somehow, the way he said it, quietly, nervously, made it feel dangerous, like the beginning of a storm. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. 10 years. 10 years of believing I was saving our home. 10 years of thinking my parents were struggling victims of circumstances. 10 years of trusting that family always told the truth. And now I realized something that hurt more than anything else. They hadn't trusted me. Not enough to tell me the truth, not enough to share their burden, not enough to treat me like an equal. Instead, they let me carry a weight I never should have borne alone. Around 3 a.m., I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. A gentle knock followed. I opened the door to find my grandmother standing there in her robe, her eyes red from crying. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She sat on the edge of my bed, holding my hands tightly like she used to when I was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "I didn't know," she whispered. Her voice trembled with guilt. "I never knew they sold the house." Tears filled my eyes. "It's not your fault," I said softly. She shook her head. "No, but it feels like I failed you," she said. "You carried this secret from me all these years." Her hands tightened around mine. "Why didn't you tell your parents?" I swallowed hard. "Because you asked me not to." She closed her eyes, pain washing over her face. "I thought I was protecting their dignity," she whispered. "I didn't realize I was hurting you." Silence fell between us. Then she said something that made my heart ache. "You shouldn't have had to be the adult," she said. "You were just a child trying to save something you loved." For the first time that night, I cried. Not out of anger, not out of betrayal, but out of exhaustion. The next morning, the house felt different, not physically, but emotionally, like a stage set after the actors have left, quiet, hollow, lifeless. My parents barely spoke during breakfast. My father looked 10 years older. My mother avoided eye contact, and my grandmother sat silently, her gaze drifting around the room like she was memorizing it, as if she already knew we might not have much time left here. Finally, my father broke the silence. "They scheduled the meeting for tomorrow," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "So soon?" He nodded. "They insisted." A cold unease settled in my stomach. Something about the urgency felt wrong, like whoever this new owner was, they weren't just being professional, they were being deliberate. The meeting location surprised me. It wasn't a law office, it wasn't a corporate building, it was a small cafe on the edge of town, neutral, public, but also personal, which made it feel even more unsettling. As I drove there alone the next day, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Questions raced through my mind. Who were they? Why did they care about me specifically? And most importantly, what did they want? The cafe bell chimed as I walked in. The smell of coffee filled the air, but it did nothing to calm my nerves. I scanned the room. Then I saw them, sitting at a corner table, waiting, watching. It wasn't what I expected. I had imagined a cold lawyer, a wealthy investor, an intimidating corporate representative. Instead, it was an older man, calm, well-dressed, with kind eyes that didn't match the tension in his posture. As soon as our eyes met, he stood up slowly. "You must be the one who's been paying the taxes," he said gently. His voice was soft, almost respectful, but something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I nodded cautiously. "Yes." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please," he said, "sit." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be careful, but I sat anyway because I needed answers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his briefcase and placed a thick folder on the table between us. "I want you to understand something first," he said quietly. "This meeting isn't about eviction." My heart skipped. "It isn't?" He shook his head. "No." Then he slid the folder toward me. "It's about the truth." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents, legal records, financial statements, property deeds, and one paper that made my breath stop completely. It was an ownership transfer document with a name on it I never expected to see. My father's. My mind went blank. I stared at the paper, unable to process what I was seeing. "This says he still owns the house," I whispered. The man nodded slowly. "Yes." My heart pounded. "But he told me he sold it years ago." The man folded his hands calmly. "He did," he said. Then he leaned forward slightly. "And then he secretly bought it back." The words hit me like a thunderclap. "What?" My hands began to shake uncontrollably. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He could barely pay bills. How could he afford to buy it back?" The man's expression darkened slightly. "Because he didn't use his own money." A cold, sinking feeling spread through my chest. "What do you mean?" He held my gaze. His next words felt like the ground collapsing beneath my feet. "Because he used yours." The words sank in slowly, like icy water seeping through every nerve in my body. "He used mine?" I whispered, voice trembling. "All those years, my taxes, my sacrifices, he used them to buy the house back?" The man across from me nodded solemnly. "Yes," he said, Legally, your parents orchestrated it so it would appear you were just paying taxes, but in reality, they funneled your payments to regain ownership without you knowing. I felt like the room had disappeared. The smell of coffee, the clinking cups, the chatter of patrons, it all faded into silence. Every memory of the last 10 years flashed before me. The long nights, the unpaid bills I skipped to cover the taxes, the exhaustion I carried like armor. And now, the revelation that it had all been used in a scheme I had no control over. I began, my voice breaking. I can't. I don't. I. The man raised a hand. I know it's a lot, he said gently, but there's more. You need to understand why they did it. I clenched my fists on the table. Why? I demanded. Why not tell me? Why not let me know? All those years. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard, struggling to hold back tears. I thought I was saving this house for the family, for Grandma, for all of us. The man's expression softened. They were desperate. They feared losing everything, and they thought you wouldn't understand, that if you knew, you'd resent them, or worse, you might have walked away. I laughed bitterly, a harsh sound that cut through the quiet cafe. Walk away? Of course I would have walked away. They made me a slave to their lies. 10 years of my life, gone. They betrayed me every single day. The man leaned back. That's exactly why they're terrified of your reaction. They never expected you to discover the truth the way you did. A cold anger settled over me, sharper than anything I had ever felt. I had spent a decade believing I was a hero, believing I was protecting my family. And now I realized that my parents had manipulated me, controlled me, used my devotion to achieve their own ends.